Labour Party.
Okay, now ask Bette to give us the kind of story so far, and then we'll push on and discuss how to move forward.
Right, hello everybody. This is a new thing entirely for me. As I said to some of you earlier, I'm not exactly what you call political. I don't as a rule attend committees or meetings or march or go on protests. I sign petitions, but that's so far down the hierarchy of armchair activism as to be completely invisible to the naked eye, so I'm not sure if that counts. I do read the papers, and I follow what people have to say on various social media, and I take it all with a very hefty pinch of salt. But I'm not blind, and I'm not deaf, and my mind isn't preoccupied with who's doing well on Britain's Got Talent. So apparently because of this, Nick has asked me to recap everything for you about what I've observed about the City Council. And it's a shame to have to say it, but the City Council isn't a pretty sight. Take, for example, the matter of George Square. Putting the final decision about the regeneration of George Square in the hands of the general public was a really lovely idea. You know, it could have been a PR dream. It could have been the city of Glasgow, imagined by the people without whom Glasgow would not be a city. And instead, what we have is this, which I found by putting Gordon Mattison into the search engine of the Architect's Journal. McCaslin wins George Square Prize, then contest is scrapped. Glasgow leader reported to ethics watchdog over George Square fiasco. Glasgow Council U-turn on George Square, an embarrassment. Police to probe Glasgow leader's role in George Square fiasco. Sex and statues. George Square farce continues. There's more, but it starts to repeat itself after a bit. You know, farce that, fiasco this, jaw-droppingly infantile fit of petulance the other. And that's in a respected academic publication. And of the vote, nothing has come but a very loud row and £100,000 of public money vanishing into the long grass during the worst recession for 3/4 of a century. There may be a good reason why this much-touted piece of civic democracy has collapsed in a great steaming heap of recrimination and legal action, but nobody in a position to know will tell anybody else what it is, opting instead for risible gushing along the lines of, the people of Glasgow have made it clear that they do not want a radical redesign, and I am proud to be listening to them, which is what Gordon Mattison said in the Herald on the 27th of January. In the unlikely event that anybody can't see why this is risible, it's because closer examination reveals, and if it didn't take a lot of effort to find, because if it did, I wouldn't have found it, that the people of Glasgow did want a radical redesign. They just didn't want the one that Mr. Mattison wanted. It seems very peculiar to me, as an apolitical person perhaps, that if Mr. Mattison was so wedded to one particular entry, he allowed it to be put to the contest at all. And even more peculiar that, having put it to the vote, he subsequently dismissed the whole thing. Surely, when the will of the people has been asked for, then the will of the people is what will be done. Surely that's how democracy works. Asking the people to make a decision and then, again in the words of a source speaking to the Herald, not me, throwing his toys out of the pram when the people didn't make the decision that one individual wanted or even expected them to make, looks an awful lot like trying to pretend that democracy is happening. If I were to be really uncharitable, I would say that it looks like Mr. Mattison takes it for granted that if he wants something, then that something will happen. That is not democracy. That is not even petty feudalism. That is having a brain like an 8-year-old boy. If only this were an isolated instance. Take the Polmady rubbish incinerator, owned and run by Viridor, which used to be the Polmady recycling plant. I was a little surprised to learn that Glasgow felt it had so much in the way of recycling facilities that it could afford to turn one into an incinerator. Because Glasgow, at least as far as domestic recycling is concerned, and in my experience, is one of the worst served areas in the whole of Great Britain. Admittedly, I only have experience of the recycling setups in Liverpool, Manchester, London and various places on either side of the Welsh border, but it has to be said that they all do recycling better than Glasgow. I mean, my parents live in North Shropshire, which is one of the poorest council districts in the UK, and their MP is Owen Paterson, who has gone on record stating that it is his earnest belief that environmentalism is a conspiracy deliberately concocted by the left wing in order to bring the global economy to its knees, and they still have more efficient, better organised recycling collections and facilities than Glasgow does. With this in mind, it seems rather odd to the casual observer that even one recycling plant should be thought so dispensable as to turn it into a facility that actively harms the environment. It seems even odder that the council should be contractually obliged to produce 200,000 tonnes of waste per annum for Viridor to dispose of in an environmentally unfriendly manner or face a fine. I don't know how high a fine, because the Freedom of Information request to find out has been repeatedly denied, and nobody will say why. I don't know if any of the I don't know if anybody realises this, but if there's an innocent explanation for this, or if the fine is 20 pence a go or some other negligible amount, then there is no reason for that Freedom of Information request to have been denied, and it makes the whole council look highly suspicious. And you know what else makes the council look suspicious? When the chief executive of the firm to whom you sold the recycling plant at a knockdown price is the brother of the then Director of Land Services. In ordinary life, which I appreciate none of the council lives because they're in politics, that would be called supremely dodgy. As would any instance when, say, the outgoing head of a regeneration agency takes as a bonus an enormous amount of money that should have been used for regenerating the city in an action that was described by the Charity Commission as misconduct, but never investigated in any way, in spite of repeated requests that somebody do so. Then again, of course, in ordinary life, people who get caught having sex in their car in a public place get prosecuted for it, which has not happened to Mr. S. Curran, Ms. A. McTaggart, or Mr. G. Madison. In ordinary life, people who are accused of sexual harassment, even if the accusation is patently bogus, are dragged through the courts for months, and their reputation may never recover, even with a complete acquittal, which is of course a terrible thing to happen to that person. However, as we live in a society where sexual crimes are viewed with such gravity that every accusation must be investigated, come what may, unless of course you're Mr. G. Davidson, in which case it seems that you can carry on. Likewise, we have money mysteriously disappearing from an LGBT centre under the auspices of Ms. R. Black, never investigated. In everywhere that I've worked, if so much as £5 remains unaccounted for at the end of the day, there will be hell to pay for everyone. So far, in the last 3 years, that is 6 separate members of Glasgow City Council in 6 separate instances who have been implicated in some...
I was expecting to see a lady here.
She'll be upstairs.
Yes.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
So far, in the last 3 years, that is 6 separate members of Glasgow City Council who have been implicated in some fairly serious legal matters. No investigation has taken place, which is a shame, because if there was an investigation, then presumably these people could have been exonerated. The very fact that any attempt to sort out whether any of this actually happened or not makes someone like me, someone who sees these things in terms of what would have happened to me if I were caught having sex in a lay-by by a police officer, feel that something peculiar is going on. I mean, we're always told by people in positions of authority, such as, for example, the City Council, that if we're innocent of any crime, then we should have nothing to fear from being investigated. And that is the essential point of my being here and saying this tonight. The Commonwealth Games is approaching, and it would be a shame if it were to start with even the slightest public suspicion that the city of Glasgow is run by a bunch of degenerate, exhibitionist, money-grubbing, juvenile spivs who appear to believe themselves above the law. Therefore, to lay the public's mind to rest and prove once and for all that all of this is just a silly misunderstanding and that Glasgow is not run like a third-rate banana republic by a bunch of degenerate, exhibitionist, money-grubbing juvenile spivs who appear to believe themselves above the law, we would like a public inquiry right now. Because if the City Council has nothing to hide, why would it want anything else?
Thanks, mate. That's very comprehensive.